A mother once coldly refused to help her daughter when she stood on the brink of losing her home. But when that same mother fell into desperation herself, she came begging for help. This time, her daughter's response would leave her completely speechless. Sometimes the lessons we teach our children come back to haunt us in ways we never imagined. This is the story of how $5,000 destroyed a family and how $25,000 sealed their fate forever. Rachel Monroe will never forget the beige kitchen in their Cleveland, Ohio home, the place where her mother would stand with cold, sharp eyes, always ready to criticize everything she did. Linda Monroe, a 5'7" woman with blonde hair always pulled into a perfect bun, ran the family like a business that needed maximum efficiency. "Rachel, why did you only get a B+ on your math test?" Linda placed the paper on the dinner table with a dry thud. "The Peterson girl got an A. She's a year younger than you." Mark Monroe, her father with perpetually slumped shoulders, merely glanced over his morning newspaper. "Linda, she tried her best." "Trying isn't enough. Mark." Linda's voice was ice cold. "In this world, nobody pities those who just try." Rachel, only 12 years old then, swallowed her tears. She learned to stay silent, learned to endure the endless comparisons. When she made the cheerleading team, her mother called it a waste of time activity. When she won second place in the school art competition, her mother asked why it wasn't first. The 2-story colonial house in suburban Cleveland looked perfect from the outside. Manicured green lawn, white picket fence, spotless windows. But inside, the atmosphere was so suffocating that Rachel often opened her bedroom window in the middle of winter just to feel the cold but free air. Every Sunday dinner became a performance review. Linda would sit at the head of the table, dissecting Rachel's week like a quarterly report. "Your piano teacher says you're not practicing enough. Your grades in English dropped from an A to an A-. The Johnson's daughter just got into the National Honor Society. Why haven't you—" Mark would occasionally mumble something about Rachel doing fine, but his words carried no weight. He'd long ago surrendered his voice in the household to keep the peace. Rachel found refuge in art class, the only place where her imagination could run free without judgment. She'd spend hours after school in the art room, creating worlds on canvas where criticism didn't exist, where mothers smiled without conditions attached. "You're wasting your time with those drawings," Linda would say, finding Rachel sketching in her room at 10:30 p. "Mom, that won't get you into a good college. You should be studying calculus." The house itself became a monument to Linda's obsession with perfection. Every surface gleamed, every pillow had its designated spot, every family photo showed forced smiles. Visitors would compliment Linda on her beautiful home, never knowing it felt more like a prison to the girl who lived there. Rachel remembered the day she got accepted to Ohio State University as the moment she could finally see the exit door, but even that achievement was met with criticism. "Ohio State. Why not somewhere more prestigious? The Anderson's son got into Northwestern." By the time Rachel turned 18, she had internalized her mother's voice so deeply that she could hear the criticisms before Linda even spoke them. She'd lost count of how many times she'd been compared to other daughters, always found lacking, never quite measuring up to the impossible standards set before her. The kitchen, with its beige walls and pristine countertops, witnessed countless moments of Rachel shrinking into herself, becoming smaller with each cutting remark. The formal dining room, with its mahogany table that seated 8, felt like a courtroom where she was perpetually on trial. Even her father's silence became a form of betrayal. Mark Monroe, a middle manager at a local insurance company, had learned that agreeing with his wife was easier than defending his daughter. His favorite phrase became, "Your mother just wants what's best for you," delivered without eye contact, like a mantra he'd stopped believing years ago. Rachel's childhood bedroom still had the same pale pink walls Linda had chosen when she was 5, because Linda always knew best, always made the decisions, always had the final say. The trophies and certificates on the shelf weren't displays of pride, but reminders of everything that hadn't been quite good enough. When the acceptance letter from Ohio State arrived, Rachel thought it was her ticket to freedom. She chose interior design as her major, a decision that sent Linda into a fury that lasted through the entire graduation dinner. Interior design. Linda laughed mockingly over the celebration meal. You're going to make a living arranging throw pillows for rich people. Why not law school like I've been telling you? Because I love art, Mom. I want to create beautiful spaces for people. Beautiful spaces don't pay bills. Rachel, you're going to regret this foolish decision. Throughout her 4 years at college, Rachel worked part-time at a campus coffee shop to cover expenses. Her mother refused to provide financial support beyond basic tuition, declaring that, if you want to pursue pipe dreams, you can pay for them yourself. The freedom of college was intoxicating. For the first time, Rachel could make choices without immediate criticism. Her professors praised her eye for design, her innovative use of space, her ability to transform ordinary rooms into something special. She discovered she had real talent, something her mother had never acknowledged. After graduating in 2012, Rachel returned to Cleveland with her bachelor's degree and a head full of dreams. She rented a small studio apartment in Tremont, 20 minutes from her parents' house, far enough to have her own space, but close enough to maintain hope that their relationship might improve. The early years were brutal. Rachel took any small project she could find, rearranging a friend's living room for $100, decorating tiny offices on shoestring budgets. Her income fluctuated wildly. Some months she'd make $2,000, other months just a few hundred. Every Sunday dinner at her parents' house came with the same refrain from Linda. When are you going to stop playing decorator and get a real job? This is a real job, Mom. I'm building a business. A business, Linda would scoff. You can barely afford that shabby apartment. Look at Jennifer Patterson. She's your age and just made partner at her law firm. That's a career. Mark would sit quietly, cutting his pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, never looking up from his plate. Rachel learned to schedule client calls during Sunday dinners, giving her an excuse to leave early. She'd sit in her beat-up Honda Civic in the driveway, watching the house she'd grown up in, wondering if she'd ever be good enough for the woman inside. The studio apartment in Tremont became her sanctuary. It was just 400 square feet, but Rachel transformed it into a showcase of what she could do with limited space and budget. She painted one wall a bold navy, found vintage furniture at estate sales, created a Murphy bed that doubled as a desk. When clients visited, they were amazed at how spacious and elegant such a tiny space could feel. But Linda never visited. I don't go to that neighborhood, she'd say, though Tremont was perfectly safe and increasingly trendy. Rachel threw herself into networking events, design shows, anything to build her reputation. She created business cards on her home printer, built a website using free templates, posted her designs on Instagram before it was standard practice. She was working 16-hour days, eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, saving every penny for better camera equipment to photograph her work. At one particularly painful Sunday dinner, Linda announced that her friend's daughter had just bought a house in Shaker Heights. 26 years old and already a homeowner, because she chose a practical career in finance. Meanwhile, you're still playing with fabric swatches. That night, Rachel cried in her car for 30 minutes before driving home. But something shifted. The tears turned into determination. She would prove her mother wrong, even if it killed her. By 2015, she had built a small but steady client base. Word of mouth spread about the young designer who could work miracles on a budget. She never said no to a project, no matter how small. A bathroom refresh for $300. A home office reorganization for $150. Each project was photographed meticulously, added to her portfolio, shared on social media. Still, every achievement was met with dismissal from Linda. When Rachel's work was featured in a local design blog, her mother's response was, "Those online things don't mean anything. Anyone can get on the internet." The relationship became a cycle of hope and disappointment. Rachel would achieve something, hope for recognition, receive criticism instead, and retreat to lick her wounds. But she kept going, driven by something deeper than spite, a genuine love for her craft and a growing belief in her own abilities, despite the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her mother's, telling her she'd never be enough. March 2016 arrived like an avalanche, burying everything Rachel had worked for. Her biggest client, a new downtown restaurant called the Metropolitan, suddenly pulled out after their investor withdrew funding. She was owed $8,000 for work already completed, money she'd never see. The same week, her 2004 Honda Civic's transmission failed catastrophically. The mechanic quoted her $3,000 for repairs on a car worth maybe $4,000. She had no choice but to fix it, without a car in Cleveland. She couldn't meet clients or transport materials. On March 15th, the knock on her apartment door came at 7:30 p.m. Mr. Kowalski, her elderly Polish landlord with deep-set wrinkles and kind eyes that looked apologetic, handed her an eviction notice. "Rachel, I'm very sorry, but you're 2 months behind on rent. If you don't have $5,000 within 10 days, I have to evict you. My wife, she's sick. We need the money too." Rachel stood there, the paper trembling in her hands. $5,000. It might as well have been $5 million. Her bank account held exactly $237. Her credit cards were maxed from buying materials for the restaurant project that would never pay her. She called everyone she knew. Her college friends were struggling with their own student loans. Former clients expressed sympathy but couldn't help. Her small network of fellow designers were barely surviving themselves. For 3 days, Rachel avoided the inevitable. She sold everything valuable she owned, an iPad from college, jewelry gifts from better times, even her beloved vintage vinyl collection she'd spent years curating. She picked up emergency freelance work, staying up until 4 a.m., designing business cards and flyers for anyone who would pay immediately. She raised $1,800. On March 18th, with 7 days left before eviction, Rachel drove to her parents' house. The familiar driveway felt like approaching a tribunal. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, practicing what she would say, trying to keep her voice from shaking even in rehearsal. Linda was in the living room, watching the news on their new 65-inch television. The room had been redecorated recently, new furniture that cost more than Rachel made in 3 months, custom window treatments, original artwork on the walls, none of it designed by Rachel. "Mom," Rachel began, her voice already betraying her desperation. "I need help. I need to borrow $5,000, or I'm going to lose my apartment." Linda muted the television with the remote, turning to face her daughter with that familiar cold assessment. She was wearing designer loungewear, her hair freshly styled from her weekly salon appointment. "Borrow you're 28 years old, Rachel. If you can't manage your own life, perhaps you should never have left home." "Mom, I'll pay you back. I just need time." "No." Linda stood up, her height advantage emphasized by her posture. "You chose this path. You chose this unstable career despite my warnings. Now you face the consequences." "Mom, you have $5,000. You just bought that TV." "That's my money, Rachel. Money I earned through a real career. Perhaps if you'd chosen an actual profession, you'd have your own money." Rachel felt the tears coming, hot and shameful. "You're going to let me become homeless. You'll learn a valuable lesson about consequences." Linda turned back to the television, unmuting it. "The door is that way." Mark sat in his recliner in the corner, staring at his hands. He opened his mouth once, as if to speak, then closed it again, sinking deeper into the leather. Rachel stood there for a moment that felt like an eternity. Her mother, the woman who had given birth to her, who had claimed to want the best for her, was calmly watching the news while her daughter faced homelessness. "Mom, please, I'm begging you." "Begging doesn't suit you, Rachel. Neither does failure. You made your bed with this ridiculous design hobby. Now lie in it." Rachel walked out on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She heard her father's voice behind her, weak and almost inaudible. "Linda, maybe we should..." "We should nothing," Mark. She needs to learn. The front door closed behind Rachel with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. She made it to her car before the sobs came, violent and uncontrollable. She drove 2 blocks before she had to pull over, unable to see through the tears. Her phone buzzed. For one desperate moment, she thought maybe her mother had changed her mind, but it was just Mr. Kowalski texting to remind her about the deadline. 7 days. She had 7 days to find $5,000 or lose everything, and the one person who could have helped, who could have solved this with what amounted to pocket change for her, had chosen to teach her a lesson instead. Rachel sat in her freezing car on that March night, feeling something inside her break. But what would emerge from those broken pieces would be someone her mother never expected. Rachel drove home through sheets of rain, tears blurring her vision until she couldn't tell what was rain and what was her own grief. She pulled into a Walmart parking lot and sat there crying until she had no tears left, until her body was empty of everything except a cold, crystalline rage. Something fundamental shifted in that moment. The desperation transformed into determination so fierce it frightened her. Over the next 10 days, Rachel became someone she didn't recognize. She took overnight shifts at an Amazon warehouse from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., then rushed to design appointments during the day. She posted on every freelance website, offering rush design consultations at rock-bottom prices. She sold her bed and slept on the floor. She sold her winter coat even though March in Cleveland was still freezing. By day 8, she had scraped together $3,800, still short, still facing eviction. Mr. Kowalski, perhaps seeing the desperation in her hollow eyes, agreed to give her 2 more weeks if she paid the $3,800 immediately and promised the rest within the month. Rachel lived like a machine for the next 6 months. 4 hours of sleep became her luxury. Ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches were her diet. She took every project, no matter how small or demeaning. $50 to organize someone's garage from Craigslist, $75 to pick paint colors for a bathroom, $200 to stage a bedroom for sale, using the homeowner's existing furniture. But something else was happening. With each small project, Rachel documented everything meticulously. She borrowed a better camera, learned photography techniques from YouTube videos at 2 a.m., edited photos on free software until they looked professional. She built a portfolio that didn't reveal the desperation behind it, only the talent. She studied successful designers online, learned their pricing strategies, their marketing techniques. She realized she'd been undervaluing herself, accepting crumbs when she deserved more. The anger at her mother became fuel for transformation. In 2017, a former client referred her to a small real estate developer named Tom Harrison. He needed someone to stage 5 luxury condos on a shoestring budget. The established designers he'd approached quoted him $40,000. Rachel said she could do it for $15,000. She worked 18-hour days on that project. She haunted estate sales, negotiated with furniture rental companies, sweet-talked art students into lending their work for exposure. She transformed those empty concrete boxes into warm, inviting homes that photographed like something from Architectural Digest. All 5 condos sold within a month, each above asking price. Tom Harrison told everyone he knew about Rachel Monroe. His contractor told his clients. Those clients told their friends. By late 2017, Rachel was turning down projects, able to be selective for the first time in her life. She hired her first assistant in 2018, a recent graduate who reminded Rachel of herself, hungry, talented, underestimated. By 2019, Rachel Monroe Interiors had become one of Cleveland's most sought-after firms for mid to high-end residential design. The pandemic of 2020 should have destroyed her business. Instead, it exploded. Everyone stuck at home suddenly realized how much their spaces mattered. Rachel pivoted to virtual consultations, created DIY design packages, offered sliding scale pricing for essential workers. The local news did a feature on her innovative approach. That led to regional attention, then national design blogs. By 2022, she had 6 employees and a waiting list of clients. She moved from her tiny apartment to a restored loft in the warehouse district. She bought a Range Rover in pearl white, not for status, but because she'd earned it with her own hands, her own vision, her own refusal to give up. The company's Instagram account hit 50,000 followers. Design influencers sought her out for collaborations. She was invited to speak at design conferences. Her story of building from nothing resonating with young designers facing their own struggles. In 2023, she opened her own office space, not rented, but purchased. The 12th floor of a downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She designed every inch herself, creating a space that told her story without words, elegant but approachable, sophisticated but warm, successful but never forgetting the struggle it took to get there. By 2024, Rachel Monroe's bank accounts held over $300,000. Her client list included Cleveland's elite, but she still took on pro bono projects for women's shelters and struggling single mothers. She knew what it felt like to have nowhere to turn. She'd built everything her mother said she couldn't. She'd proven that her ridiculous hobby could become an empire. But more than that, she'd built herself into someone who would never again beg for help from someone who saw her dreams as worthless. The girl who once cried in a Walmart parking lot over $5,000 now signed contracts worth 10 times that without blinking. The transformation was complete, forged in the fire of abandonment and betrayal, hardened by the cold reality that the only person she could truly count on was herself. August 2024 brought a storm to Ohio unlike anything in recent memory. 3 days of torrential rain and winds that reached 90 miles per hour. Trees that had stood for decades were ripped from the ground. Power lines came down across entire neighborhoods. Cleveland was declared a disaster zone. The Monroe house in the suburbs, that perfect colonial that had been Linda's pride for 30 years, took the worst of it. The roof, which Linda had repeatedly postponed replacing because it still has years left in it, was no match for the storm. Nearly half of it was torn away, exposing the second floor to the elements. Water poured in for 2 days before the storm passed. The ceiling in the master bedroom collapsed. The walls grew black with mold. The pristine hardwood floors Linda had obsessed over warped and buckled. 3 decades of accumulated perfection destroyed in 72 hours. The insurance adjuster arrived a week later, a young man with a tablet who walked through the house shaking his head. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm afraid this damage isn't covered. The roof failure is due to lack of maintenance, not storm damage. See here, these shingles should have been replaced 10 years ago." But the storm exposed existing problems. Your policy doesn't cover negligent maintenance. I'm sorry. The estimate for repairs came to $25,000. New roof, mold remediation, ceiling replacement, floor restoration. $25,000 Linda and Mark Monroe didn't have. Mark's retirement from the insurance company had come with a modest pension. Their savings had been depleted by his heart surgery the previous year, a triple bypass that even with insurance had cost them $30,000 out of pocket. Their credit cards were maxed from medical bills and the slow drain of living beyond their means while refusing to acknowledge it. Linda sat in her moldy living room, buckets and pots scattered across the floor to catch the water that still dripped through what remained of the ceiling. She called her friends from the book club, the women who had always admired her perfect home, her perfect life. "Linda, darling, we're so sorry," Barbara said, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy that enjoyed itself. "But 25,000. That's rather a lot. Have you tried the bank?" The bank turned them down within minutes of reviewing their application. Debt-to-income ratio too high. Credit score damaged by recent late payments on the credit cards. No equity left in the house to borrow against. Margaret from the country club suggested a GoFundMe. "Everyone's doing it these days," she said brightly. But Linda Monroe, who had spent decades cultivating an image of success and superiority, would rather live under a tarp than publicly beg for money. She tried her brother in Florida, but he was dealing with his own problems, a messy divorce that was costing him everything. Her sister in California hadn't spoken to her in 5 years after Linda had criticized her life choices one too many times. Each night, the house got worse. The mold spread. The smell became unbearable. They moved their bedroom to the living room, sleeping on the couch that had cost $8,000 but couldn't keep them dry when it rained. Mark finally said what they both were thinking. "You need to call Rachel." "Absolutely not." Linda's voice was sharp but brittle. "I won't beg from my own daughter." "Linda, look around. We're sleeping in a living room. The house is being destroyed. Your pride won't keep a roof over our heads." "She won't help anyway. Why would she?" "You don't know that." "I know our daughter. She's probably enjoying this, knowing we're struggling." But as another week passed, as the house inspector threatened to condemn the property if repairs weren't started immediately, Linda's resistance crumbled. She found herself on Rachel's company website at 2 a.m., staring at the professional headshot of her daughter. Rachel looked successful, confident, everything Linda had said she'd never be. The website showcased project after project of stunning transformations: luxury condos, million-dollar homes, corporate offices, testimonials from clients praising Rachel's vision, her professionalism, her ability to exceed expectations, articles from design magazines, awards from industry organizations. Linda clicked through to an interview Rachel had given to Cleveland magazine. The headline read, "From Nothing to Everything: How Rachel Monroe Built a Design Empire." In the article, Rachel talked about starting with nothing, building her business through determination and hard work. She mentioned challenges and setbacks, but never mentioned her family. It was as if Linda and Mark didn't exist in their daughter's success story. Which, Linda realized with a sick feeling, was exactly right. They hadn't been part of Rachel's success. They'd been obstacles she'd overcome. Mark found her crying at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., her laptop still open to Rachel's website. "Call her," he said quietly. "What's the worst that can happen?" Linda looked around the destroyed kitchen, water dripping into a pot on the counter where she'd once prepared perfect dinners for her perfect family that had never actually been perfect at all. The worst had already happened. She just hadn't realized it until now. The building that housed Rachel Monroe Interiors stood gleaming in downtown Cleveland's business district, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Linda had to crane her neck to see the top floors. She'd dressed in her best outfit, a 5-year-old St. John suit that now hung loose on her frame. The stress had cost her 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. The lobby intimidated her with its marble floors and modern art installations. The security guard checked her name against a list before allowing her to the elevators. Everything about the building screamed success, the kind Linda had always claimed her daughter would never achieve. The elevator rode smoothly to the 12th floor. When the doors opened, Linda stepped into a reception area that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light. The walls displayed framed magazine covers featuring Rachel's work. Fresh orchids sat on a reception desk made of white marble and gold metal. The receptionist, a polished young woman with striking red hair and a warm smile, looked up from her computer. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment with Ms. Monroe?" I'm her mother." The receptionist's expression remained professionally neutral, though Linda caught a flicker of something, surprise knowledge, in her eyes. "Let me check if she's available. Please, have a seat." Linda lowered herself onto a white leather sofa that probably cost more than her mortgage payment. She studied the awards in a glass case, the framed newspaper clippings, the photograph of Rachel shaking hands with the mayor at some charity event. Her daughter had built all of this while Linda wasn't watching, wasn't participating, wasn't even aware. 10 minutes passed. 15. Linda wondered if Rachel would simply leave her sitting here, a taste of her own medicine. Finally, the receptionist returned. "Ms. Monroe will see you now." The walk to Rachel's private office felt endless. They passed glass-walled conference rooms, design stations where young people worked on computers with massive screens, samples rooms filled with fabrics and materials Linda recognized as expensive. Everyone they passed looked busy, purposeful, creative, the kind of energy Linda had once dismissed as impractical. Rachel's office door was solid wood, her name engraved on a bronze plaque. The receptionist knocked once, then opened it. The office was even more impressive than the reception area. A glass desk dominated the space, positioned to take advantage of the spectacular city view. 2 large monitors displayed design projects. A sitting area with designer furniture occupied one corner, and behind the desk sat Rachel. Linda almost didn't recognize her own daughter. Rachel, at 34, looked like she'd stepped from the pages of a business magazine. Her hair was professionally styled in sophisticated layers. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that Linda knew instinctively cost 4 figures. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, enhancing the blue eyes she'd inherited from Mark. But it was more than the clothes or the office. Rachel carried herself differently. She radiated confidence, authority, success. She looked like someone who never had to beg for anything. "Mother," Rachel didn't stand up. "It's been a while." Linda stood there, suddenly unsure where to put her hands, how to stand, what to say. The script she'd rehearsed evaporated. "Sit down." Rachel gestured to the chair across from her desk. Linda sat, feeling like she'd been summoned to the principal's office. The power dynamic was completely reversed from every interaction they'd ever had. "You look, well," Linda managed. "Thank you. You don't—" Rachel's tone was observational, not cruel. "Why are you here?" No pleasantries, no catch-up conversation. Straight to business, just like Linda had taught her. Linda's throat felt dry. The house was damaged in the storm. The roof. It's destroyed. The repair estimate is $25,000. "Have you contacted your insurance?" "They won't cover it. They say it's due to lack of maintenance." Rachel nodded slowly, tapping a Mont Blanc pen against the desk, a gesture Linda recognized as her own, now reflected back at her. "And you've come here because—" The words stuck in Linda's throat like broken glass. "You know why I'm here, Rachel." "I want to hear you say it." Linda looked at her daughter, really looked at her. This wasn't the desperate 28-year-old who had begged for help 8 years ago. This was someone who had been forged in fire, who had built an empire from nothing, who had every reason to enjoy this moment. I need your help. Mark and I don't have $25,000. If we don't repair the roof, the house will be condemned. We'll have nowhere to live." Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying her mother with those cool blue eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 8 years of unspoken words, unbridged distance, unhealed wounds. $25,000, Rachel repeated slowly. 5 times what I once asked you for. Linda's face flushed hot. That was different. How was it different? Mother, I was about to be homeless. You're about to be homeless. Seems quite similar to me. Linda Monroe, the woman who had always controlled everything, who had always had the last word, now sat trembling before her daughter. Her hands clutched her worn purse so tightly her knuckles went white. Rachel, you're my daughter. Family is supposed to help each other. Rachel laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed off the glass walls. Family is supposed to help each other. Really. Mother, do you remember what you said to me 8 years ago when I begged you for $5,000? You survived? Do you remember? Rachel stood up, walking around the desk with deliberate slowness. You said, if you can't manage your own life, perhaps you should never have left home. Do you remember that? Linda's head dropped. I was trying to teach you. Teach me what that I wasn't worth helping, that my dreams were worthless, that family love comes with conditions. Rachel moved to the window, looking out at the city below. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office floor. You know what's funny if you had helped me then. I would have given you $25,000 today without a second thought, but you taught me a different lesson. You're successful now, Linda said, her voice growing smaller. You can afford? I can. Rachel turned back, her expression as cold as Linda's had been that night 8 years ago. But I won't. Tears began rolling down Linda's cheeks, leaving tracks through her carefully applied makeup. You're going to let me lose my home. Rachel returned to her chair, reassuming her professional composure. If you can't manage your own life, perhaps you should never have considered yourself so perfect. The office fell into a silence so complete they could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Linda Monroe, who had spent decades breaking her daughter down with criticism and comparison, was now broken herself, sitting before the woman Rachel had become despite her, or perhaps because of her. You hate me, Linda whispered. No, Rachel said, her voice calm and measured. I don't hate you. I'm simply following your example. You taught me that family means nothing when they can't help themselves. I'm just doing exactly what you taught me. Rachel stood again, this time moving toward the door. My assistant will show you out. Linda struggled to her feet, her legs shaking. She looked at her daughter one last time. This successful, powerful woman she'd never believed Rachel could become. You'll regret this. Perhaps, Rachel said, her hand on the door handle. But at least I'll have a roof over my head while I regret it. The words hung in the air like a blade. Linda's face crumpled completely. The woman who had once stood tall in her superiority now looked small, defeated, every one of her 64 years showing in the lines of her face. I was wrong, Linda said suddenly, the words tumbling out. Is that what you want to hear? I was wrong about you, about your career, about everything. Rachel paused but didn't turn around. No, Mother. What I wanted to hear was, yes, I'll help you 8 years ago. It's too late for apologies now. Please. The word came out as barely a whisper. Linda Monroe, who had never begged for anything in her life, was begging now. Please, Rachel, we have nowhere else to turn. Rachel finally turned to face her mother. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, perhaps a ghost of the daughter who had once desperately sought her mother's approval, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Neither did I, Rachel said quietly. And you taught me that was my problem to solve. Now it's yours. She opened the door. The receptionist stood waiting in the hallway, summoned by some invisible signal. Please show Mrs. Monroe out, Rachel said, her tone professional and detached. Linda stood frozen for a moment, as if she couldn't quite process what was happening. Then, with movements that seemed to age her another decade, she walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back one more time. I'm sorry, she said. Rachel had already returned to her desk, picking up her phone as if her mother had never been there at all. I'm sure you are. Now. The receptionist gently touched Linda's elbow, guiding her away. As they walked back through the impressive office, past the busy employees and beautiful designs, Linda understood with crushing clarity that she was walking through the life her daughter had built without her, despite her, in defiance of her. At the elevator, the receptionist spoke softly. The car park validates parking. Do you need— No, Linda said, her voice hollow. I don't need anything. But that was a lie. She needed $25,000. She needed a roof over her head. And most of all, she needed the daughter she'd pushed away, the daughter who had learned her mother's lessons all too well. The elevator doors closed on Linda Monroe's last hope, descending 12 floors that felt like a lifetime of mistakes coming home to roost. Linda Monroe walked out of the building into the harsh afternoon sunlight, having to squint against its brightness. Cleveland continued its rhythm around her, cars passing, pedestrians hurrying, life moving forward. But Linda's world had collapsed entirely. She sat in her aging Toyota Camry for 30 minutes, unable to summon the energy to start the engine. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. How did it go? She couldn't respond. There were no words for this kind of defeat. The drive home took forever. Every red light felt like an accusation. Every turn a reminder of the journey she'd have to make back to a house that would soon be condemned. When she finally pulled into the garage, Mark was standing at the door, his face full of desperate hope. "Well?" he asked. Linda shook her head, unable to speak. Mark's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in their 35 years of marriage, she saw him cry. Back in her office, Rachel sat alone in the growing twilight. The city lights were beginning to twinkle below, transforming Cleveland into something magical. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old, yellowed piece of paper, the eviction notice from 8 years ago. She'd kept it all this time, a reminder of where she'd been and why she could never go back. Her phone buzzed with a client message about a new project, a $2 million home renovation in Gates Mills. Rachel read it but couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to her mother's face, the way it had crumpled when she'd repeated Linda's own words back to her. She walked to the window, looking out at the city she'd conquered. 8 years ago, she'd been nobody. Nothing. A failure in her mother's eyes. Now she had everything. Money, success, respect. Everything except the one thing she'd wanted most as a child, her mother's love and approval. But that ship had sailed the night Linda had chosen to teach her a lesson instead of throwing her a lifeline. Rachel tore the eviction notice into small pieces, letting them flutter into the wastebasket like snow. She'd held onto it for too long, just as she'd held onto the hope that someday her mother would see her, really see her, and be proud. That day would never come now. Her assistant knocked and entered. "Ms. Monroe, your 4:30 appointment is here." "Send them in," Rachel said, her voice perfectly professional. Life continued. Business thrived. The Rachel Monroe empire grew larger every day. 3 weeks later, Rachel heard through professional contacts that her parents' house had been condemned. They'd moved into a small apartment in a less desirable part of town, Mark taking a part-time job at 70 to help make rent. Linda, someone mentioned, looked like she'd aged 10 years in a month. Rachel felt nothing, or tried to feel nothing. Late at night, alone in her luxury penthouse, she sometimes wondered if she'd made the right choice. But then she remembered that cold March night, standing in her childhood home, begging for help while her mother watched TV and told her she deserved to be homeless. The news of Linda and Mark Monroe's fall from grace spread through their social circle quickly. The same friends who'd admired Linda's perfect house now whispered about her downfall with barely concealed satisfaction. The book club continued without her. The country club revoked their membership for non-payment of dues. Rachel donated $25,000 to a homeless shelter that week. She couldn't help her mother, but she could help other mothers who might be struggling. It was more than Linda had ever done for her. 6 months passed. Rachel's business continued to soar. She was featured on the cover of Interior Design magazine. She gave a TED Talk about building success from failure. She never mentioned her parents. Then, one rainy Tuesday at 11:45 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. "Ms. Monroe, this is Cleveland General Hospital. Your father has had a heart attack. He's asking for you." Rachel sat in her designer bedroom, rain pattering against the windows, and made a choice. She got dressed and drove to the hospital. Mark looked small in the hospital bed, older than his 70 years. Linda sat beside him, and when she saw Rachel, fresh tears started. "Thank you for coming," Linda whispered. Rachel said nothing, just sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair and waited. After an hour, the doctor announced Mark would recover but needed expensive medication and cardiac rehabilitation. Rachel paid for everything, not for Linda, but for the man who'd at least tried, even if he'd failed, to stand up for her sometimes. She arranged for the best specialists, the best care, all anonymously through the hospital's billing department. She never spoke to Linda directly again. but she made sure her father survived. Because Rachel Monroe had learned her mother's lessons perfectly, help has conditions, love has limits, and family is just a word unless it's backed by actions. She'd built her empire on those cold truths, and she'd lived by them ever since. The penthouse was quiet when she returned that night. Rachel poured herself a glass of wine and stood at her window, looking out at Cleveland's lights. She'd won. She had everything. She'd proven her mother wrong and gotten her revenge. So why did victory taste so much like ashes? Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for another day. And Rachel Monroe, successful beyond her wildest dreams and alone by her own choice, raised her glass in a toast to the girl who'd once cried in a Walmart parking lot and promised herself she'd never be vulnerable again. She'd kept that promise. The price had been her heart, but perhaps that was a fair trade. After all, her mother had taught her that nothing in this world was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Rachel's situation? Your perspectives mean everything to me.